Rochelle, perhaps we've already missed our chance this morning. Volkswagen's shares were under 100 euros briefly. Now they're up to 112 euros. How do we figure out whether they are a buy? They were at 165 before the emissions testing scandal broke out.
Yeah, so they've lost about 20 billion euros for sitting where they are now. To take a look at what they've gone, we have to basically analyze what are the costs or the fallout of this.
So let's start with the fines.
So the fines for the 500,000 US cars, assuming they get the maximum fine of 37,500 for each one of those cars, that's $18 billion US.
Well, that covers up the extent of the damage to the stock right there. You know, give or take $1 billion or $2 billion.
Well,
looks like a one-to-one relationship, and the stock is fairly valued.
From your background, you know it's not quite that easy.
Yes.
So, I mean, those fines aren't going to be all paid out tomorrow, so you need to discount that, assuming that is even, the fine could be less than that. But then there's other costs, the costs of recalls, the costs of any lawsuits that happen, and that's for the 500,000 cars that are in the US market. You've also got, Volkswagen has come out and said this engine is in, this issue is in 11 million engines around the world. So those are different regulators, different regulatory regimes. You can be guaranteed a lot of them are jumping on testing and looking at what they do. So there could be some other fines coming in around there.
But it does seem a little bit of perspective is called for here. We've had big scandals at global car companies in recent years where errors of commission or omission have actually led to the deaths of consumers. So you have problems with airbags or accelerator pedals or ignition switches. The company ignores the problem and people die. That seems to be different in this case.
It is very different. I mean, this is more about pollution. This is not about someone directly dying as a result of a little bit of extra emissions, a little bit of NOx. But NOx is of a concern, and the pollution levels are getting higher, so it is definitely of note. The fines are eye-popping.
Yes.
But like with the banks, you know, and LIBOR, there are big fines, but at 5 years down the road, those are most of the same banks still standing. But the issue is, what does their business model look like and what changes?
Right.
And
why would this scandal change their business model?
Well, because they've already been facing really tight emissions, and emissions rules are getting tighter.
Yes.
So if that happens, as they're trying to meet those really difficult targets, on top of that, the testing regime starts to reflect real-world conditions, because it was a very open secret that what the cars got for their emissions in the current testing regime wasn't what they were getting on the road.
So the threat, if I understand you correctly, is that the emission standards, which are already tough, sort of become de facto tougher.
Yeah, because they're actually testing properly.
And cars that meet those standards are less profitable to make. Is that the picture here?
Yeah, and possibly harder to sell, because maybe they aren't quite as powerful, maybe they aren't quite as fuel efficient, maybe they aren't quite as fun to drive, which were the reasons why this diesel override was in there.
Is it conceivable to sort of quantify that possibility? In other words, what might the damage to profitability look like?
It's very difficult. It's a really capital-intensive business. They can change it over time, but it's difficult to do. And to be honest, they have most of the technology that's there already. So estimates that are bandied around are sort of, say, 100 to 300 or 100 to 400 euros a car to actually make them compliant. But the real issue comes on the other side, which is the selling. So the brand damage. Are they going to be able to sell enough? And also potentially credit impact. So if their credit rating comes down, does their financing get more expensive?
Yes.
Is it more difficult to sell those cars to customers without? So there's a lot of unknowns swirling around.
Maybe I can sum up like this. The amount of damage to Volkswagen's value, the value of its stock so far, seems to capture, as it were, the worst case scenario for the fines.
Yep.
But what you're telling me is there's more to think about than just the fines.
Most definitely.
Thanks, Rochelle.